Hey, Day Camp Pros. We've had a series of awesome podcasts this season with inspiring stories about making the jump to being a director or even an owner operator. Since I shared the Jonathan Gold podcast with my friends Howie and Kelly on the Camp Owners Pod, they're sharing back another great podcast with my former camp sidekick Jason Samuel, who recently found his way to becoming a camp owner operator himself. We're proud of you, Jason. This is the Day Camp Pod.
This is the Day Camp Pod from Go Camp Pro, bringing you the best ideas, strategies, and discussions in the day camp industry. You can find our show notes at daycamppodcast.com.
Let me tell you about CampMinder, the #1 camp database in the world. It has the most robust offerings of service features found anywhere. Every feature works together to create a full, seamless system that helps your camp office run more efficiently while giving your camp family state-of-the-art communication and financial tools. Check out the details at campminder.com. AM Skyer is a leading insurance and strategic partner for many of the finest camps in America. AM Skyer partners with camps to provide public relations, legal, medical, behavioral support, and more. Experience the AM Skyer difference. Learn more at amskyer.com. The Day Camp Podcast is brought to you by CRS, Commercial Recreation Specialists, your go-to source for recreation solutions that will ensure that your camp thrives. Explore their website today at CRS4Rec. CRS is serious about fun.
Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We're going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Shuna, and I am the co-owner and executive director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp, located in Stillwater, Minnesota.
And hi, everybody. I'm Howie Grossinger, and I am the co-owner and co-director of Camp Robin Hood in Ontario, Canada. If you are looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be useful to other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your circle, please feel free to send them a note to listen. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, Howie. How are you?
I'm great. We're back at it.
We're back at it. I'm happy to be sitting here because I spent the day auditing all of our overnight camping tents to see if they still work and if the zippers work and if the rain flies are there. So I had a very campy day. So this is lovely to just sit and talk about camp. I'm done.
Exactly. And are you experiencing this great weather? We're like at the time of recording, we're having a great blast of weather here up in the Toronto area, and the leaves are beautiful. And I'm sure in Minneapolis, Minnesota area, it is beautiful as well.
Absolutely beautiful day. It's almost like August outside. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
So taking advantage of it.
Amazing, amazing. So we continue our journey through the Camp Owners Podcast for this season with another exciting topic, which I know we're going to introduce in just a second. And I just wanted to do a huge shout out before we get started to Camp Brain and Camptivities, our sponsors for once again this season of the Camp Owners Podcast. I want to thank them for their continued support. So with that, Kelly, who do we got today?
Oh, today. Well, we have talked a lot with really experienced longtime camp pros over our past couple of seasons who have so much camp experience and knowledge to share. But today we're going to take a different look through the lens of a new camp owner and hear about their experience starting in camp, how they did it, what they've learned along the way, and where they're headed. So our guest today is Jason Samuel from the Nature Place. We're bringing the East Coast to our Canadian Midwest vibe here, Howie.
Yes.
So we're super excited to hear about your story, Jason. But of course, we always get started with your origin story. So how did you get to be here today? How did you get into camping? Give us the spiel.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I think the spiel really goes back to when I was 16. I wanted to go sailing all summer long, and I couldn't afford a boat, so I got a job at the Boy Scout camp that I went to as a sailing instructor, and I haven't had a summer off since. Worked my way up to waterfront director and worked at a couple other resident camps after that Boy Scout experience, and graduated from college. I started my own photography business. I have a film degree. And I was working for a pretty awful cable news station where I'm from in Connecticut. And it really drove me to be a camp professional because I didn't feel like I was doing anything good for the world. I didn't feel like I was contributing. And so I gave my notice in April when the camp that I worked at the previous summer called me desperately seeking another waterfront director, and went back to camp, had an awesome summer. Afterwards, I didn't have a job or a place to go. And they were lucky enough to hire me on to roof some cabins. And during that time, I was looking for a full-time camp gig and was like email blasting my resume out to anybody that would pick it up. And I remember the last day that I was working there, they called me up. It's like, all right, we ran out of money. You got to leave. And that's when I get a phone call to come for an interview. And that's how I turned into a camp pro. I started in December of 2004 at Liberty Lake, first time as a year-round professional as an assistant director with Andy when we were just building Liberty Lake. And since then, after Liberty Lake, I went on to run a resident camp and then back into the day camp world, both private and nonprofit, both private as in like just a regular camp and also nonprofit and of movement sect. So yeah, lots of different experiences, but I always run my own shop and was finally able to make that dream a reality in 2022 when I purchased the Nature Place.
I just love hearing all these stories, Jason. Yours is really something, and to be on the ground floor of Liberty Lake at the time that Andy was getting that great program off the ground. We often talk about people in the industry who get a Bachelor of Science arts degree in the camping world, and where do you get your master's or your PhD? And it sounds like that stage was definitely postgraduate work. My feeling is that there was so much that you learned during those times to go on to all the adventures it sounds like you had. We're really, as we explore this topic of not only your journey, but the things you learned, one of the things we're always trying to impart on the show is just lessons learned and things people have gone through. But the industry there's so many opportunities in the industry, and just your brief story of your own journey, it looks like you've had so many different experiences. Talk to us a little bit about how you settled into wanting to be in the day camp space as a camp owner. I mean, obviously you had lots of experience in different areas, but maybe we can start with opportunities and why day camp.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I'm passionate about answering because day camp is where it's at, in my opinion. So I started off as a resident camp person, thought, oh, only resident camp. That's actually who I was mass emailing was resident camps. And then I saw a day camp position, like, all right, well, I'm getting desperate, right? But through my experiences, and more importantly, through having a family, day camp makes the dream possible. Because if your other half, or in my case, my better half, is not involved in camp, then day camp is like the only way to make it possible without having them drive like a 3 or 4 hour drive on every weekend and be an absentee spouse or partner for 3 or 4 months a year. Also, when it comes to raising a family. So after my stint as a resident camp director, my wife, who is definitely my better half, goes to me. It's like, all right, you got that out of your system. Time to go back to day camp. It's so much better to have you. I know you're going to be emotionally unavailable for the entire summer, but at least you could be that warm body next to me in bed at night kind of thing. And so it was definitely a great compromise to be able to continue something I'm passionate about, working in camp, and also stay married and have a family.
I'm not going to comment on the emotionally unavailable in the summer. Well, that might be true. I feel called out. I feel seen. That's funny. But yes, very true. At the same time, our spouses should talk. But anyway, interesting, really interesting. And I think super valuable to have both of those experiences, to have that residential overnight camp experience. So that's interesting. That was a good question, Howie. So, Jason, what I'm wondering about is, how did you go about, so you said you purchased the Nature Place. So was the Nature Place, tell us a little bit about that. Was it a camp prior? Was it similar to a camp? But tell us about how you took that leap into buying a camp and kind of a little bit of the origin of the Nature Place.
Yeah. So Nature Place was founded 40 years ago. We're celebrating our 40th birthday this summer, which is super exciting. by Ed Beaver, who is a naturalist. And he was going around to area schools doing nature programming. And somebody said, "Hey, you should do a camp like this." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I'll do that. Oh, where should I do that?" And his kids happened to be going to a private school and reached out to them. It's like, "Hey, can I hold camp there?" Yeah. And they said yes for the last 39, now going on 40 years. So it has been a camp. It has been a going concern, as they say in the business world. And it's always been a family owned business and very family owned. So Ed and his entire family, his kids and his kids' spouses, all took turns in different portions of running the camp. And as you all know, that running camp in COVID was really tough. And when Ed became ill, it fell more onto his kids, and his kids were starting their own family, and they were also had other full-time jobs, and running camp during COVID is tough. And I think they saw that, you know what, it's better to have somebody take this over that's more passionate, that can dedicate the time to make sure this thing succeeds and thrives and has the energy to do so. And that's when they started looking to transition.
When maybe just a step back from the nature place sort of decision making around selling, how long, Jason, were you and your wife contemplating the whole purchase of a camp, getting into the business side of camp? Like the reality of 2022 and coming across a seller that kind of checked off all the boxes for you, I would imagine, and maybe we'll get into why that particular property and program checked off those boxes. But prior to that, had you been testing the waters out for a while? Like, give us some sense of before actually becoming the new owner of
Yeah.
the nature place, how long was this kind of exploration of ownership in front and center for you?
Yeah, great question. So I think my journey led me to like wanting to become my own owner, right? I've had some really great people to work for, camp owners to work for, and then I've had some people that weren't so great in my own opinion. And that's really what motivated me to want to have my own spot, my own place. For a little while, I was resigned to the fact that because of camp consolidation in our industry, there was going to be no way I was going to be able to own a camp. I don't come from a lot of money. I don't have a lot of money. I didn't have a bunch of equity or capital ready to go into a camp. And especially here on the East Coast, any camps that go up for sale, they're sold before people even know about it.
Mhm.
So the access to deal make didn't really exist. And then COVID changed all of that, at least for a short while. I don't know if it's going back or not, but so soon as 2020 happened, everything was upside down. And I definitely jumped back into, all right, let's go down the ownership thing and path, and actually started working on a different property in a different camp to purchase. And it fell through for a couple of different reasons. And then I learned about the nature place. And while I was doing due diligence on the nature place, that other camp came back in the picture. And then
Mm.
I remember sitting on my couch with my wife after going for my first physical tour of the nature place. And it's like, okay, so which camp should we buy? Um,
Yeah.
and like I was being a little flippant at the point because there was so many hurdles to jump over and so many things had to fall into place. But you know, through years of just like no access to a path to ownership to now having possible on your plate at the same time, it was just wild. It was absolutely
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you and your wife, I mean, you talked a lot about family life and day camp being sort of where you needed to be for family and all those good things. Was geography a big part of that? I mean, you were at Liberty Lake, which geographically is quite far from where you are now. And were both of these camps geographically in a similar area, or were you prepared to really uproot yourself for the right opportunity?
Yeah, these two camps were in the same, well, they were both commutable from
Mhm.
where we live and for where my wife works. So like
Yeah.
maybe the other opportunity we would have moved a couple of towns away kind of thing. But I don't think we were willing to relocate. Like we were ready to go to Colorado. Both of our families are on the East Coast. And at the time where ownership became a possibility, my wife was really, and still is actually, really happy where she is in her career and wanted to stay and keep working where she is. So happy wife, happy life. And
Mhm.
if that didn't mean uprooting the family and going to Texas, then I was going to get the green light from her to go after a purchase.
How do
The
you
oh, go ahead, Cal.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, I feel like at a camp conference, I feel like actually ACA last year it came up, people talking about like how do you like your comment about on the East Coast camps are already sold before you find out about it. And I think that's an interesting question and even would be almost a topic to explore further, Howie. But it looks like then the three of us have come into camp a little bit different, where Howie was in his wife's family. Mine, we approached the previous owners, like we want to buy this. Whereas you, it sounds like you heard about it. So how did you hear about the nature place? Because I do think that's a question. Like, how do you even know if camps are for sale? And is this their secret network? But like, how did you, I guess maybe both of them, the one that you were looking at that didn't work out and this one, how did you find out that they were an option to buy?
Yeah, it's all about the networking. And it's not like some secret clandestine network, right? It's knowing other camp pros. It's knowing and having a good relationship with ACA staff. And it's really whoever has their ears open. I don't think any of those two deals were like top secret. I think people have the word out, and that's how I got there, right? Like I wouldn't have got there if it was like super confidential, just not at that level. I don't have that money and I don't have that like clout, right? But it was out there, but it's not advertised. So you just have to have a really big network. And through my volunteering in the ACA and going to as many professional development pieces that you can, and from doing this for a while and having great social experiences with other camp folks during professional development, you get a network. And one day you're having coffee with somebody. It's like, hey, how was your summer? It was really hard, but it was good. Nobody got sick. Oh, that's wonderful. What are you still doing where you are? It's like, well, I don't know. I would leave if I could. It's like, well, have you talked to this person? Go on. And that's literally how it happens.
Yeah, we
So
should
it's
ask. Maybe ACA would like to sponsor this podcast episode. But I think what you're touching on is that is great wisdom and so true. And Howie and I even feel this way with the podcast, but just talking to people and meeting people and putting it out in the universe, and you just never know a conversation that you strike up, whether it's in the hallway of a PD event or sitting at lunch with someone about what will come up or who has heard of someone that is ready to go. But I think that's really important and powerful. And it speaks to, I think, our industry, and it just talking to others and that networking is invaluable. You just never really know
yeah.
where
Well, yeah. I also think that, and I think Jason's example of the networking is, first of all, it's so great to be part of an industry where people are so giving, right? The example of the coffee is such a real thing in our industry. And whether it's at Tri-State or whether it's at another ACA event or up here in Ontario, I feel there is this real welcoming of young people who are starting out, have an eye for some sort of journey in the industry. And I think we all agree you got to sit in sessions when they're talking about these things, and you got to put face to name. And I think, if I can speak from my own experience, but it sounds like for you, Jason, and I know for you, Kelly, is saying hello and shaking hands and, hey, can I reach out? I have a few questions to learn about your journey kind of stuff. We get to do it formally in a podcast setting, but man, these conversations I've been having for the close to 30 years I've been going to the Tri-States and the other conferences. So don't underestimate the value of that. And we're lucky we're in an industry where people are willing to share some of their strategies, but also we want to learn from pitfalls too, don't we? And I think that people are willing to do that, which is so awesome. And I know we all have stories of people saying, if you can avoid doing what happened to me, that would be a good thing. And I can share the same with other people. So great. That's a great point to emphasize, I think.
Yeah. And just to really put the exclamation point on that, like I've been fortunate to have really great friends and mentors in the industry. And not just people that I've worked with or like volunteered with. A person who was instrumental for putting my Nature Place deal together, which basically held my hand through all the business stuff. Because I don't have a business background and definitely needed some schooling there. And we had zero professional connection, except we're in the industry and we knew each other. And just the amount of access and time that person gave me was incredible.
Right.
And probably wouldn't have been able to put the deal together, like a good deal together, without him. So
yeah,
you never know who you need.
Absolutely. And I think that I've said this before on a previous episode, is like that whole process from beginning to end, and it really never ends, is really a very real-time MBA program when you're going through that stuff. And I was a phys ed teacher. I had great mentors in Sari's parents and her father in particular. But at the end of the day, when you're living it, you got to call on all these experts and mentors, and they really do teach you so much.
For over 100 years, summer camps have been an integral part of the AM Skyer world. AM Skyer is a strategic partner for summer camps across the country, building personal relationships and providing valuable resources to their clients and friends. Every day, AM Skyer is proud to support camps and make them safer. Skyer was founded by Abe Skyer in 1920 and is now the third generation of Skyer family leadership. My friends Henry, Jeffrey, and Amy, and the experienced AM Skyer staff, they eat, sleep, and breathe summer camps while fostering partnerships with camps that last for decades, if not centuries. Give AM Skyer the opportunity to find solutions for your most challenging insurance needs. I can tell you firsthand, they truly go above and beyond. Learn more at amskyer.com. As a camp director, you're a leader of your camp and a pillar in your community. When your customers put tremendous trust in you, CampMinder's powerful management software tools deliver the day-to-day task support that helps you make every touchpoint moment memorable and every summer stellar. CampMinder has the most user-friendly platform for both your staff and your parents, and is backed by a team of crafty engineers and customer service associates who are constantly thinking of ways to optimize your camp's database, communication, and financial management. With state-of-the-art app for your camp families and an API available for third-party softwares, CampMinder is always evolving elite summer camp software. Check them out today at campminder.com.
So that's a good segue, Jason, then to what we did want to talk about, because I think people are curious about, who are in your shoes maybe a few years ago, is we talked about that mentor and putting together a deal. How did you do that? If, like you said, you don't have a rich uncle who gave you $1 million to do this, or money in your coffee cans in your basement, but like, how did you make this work? And what did you leverage to be able to buy the nature place?
I leveraged everything. Yeah. Which again is going back to having a willing spouse and partner. Like they're fully invested in it too. And we're not going to say that there's a mortgage on my son, but maybe there is. But how did this deal come about and how did I make it happen? Well, there's one very interesting piece about the nature place, and that is there's no land with it. It's a company that leases a school and lots of acreage. And when you take land out of the equation, the numbers start becoming a lot more realistic for those that are not privately wealthy. And when you add a motivated owner into that, then the numbers start becoming really realistic. And that's, like, in a nutshell, that's how we did that. The numbers are much smaller with no land, because there's not a ton of asset that you're purchasing. It's mostly brand acquisition and things along those lines. So the numbers become so much smaller. The bank is another big important partner, and you find one of these rare jewels of a camp, an ACA accredited camp with 40-year history. Well, at that time, a 36-year history, that doesn't have land, but has a history, and you could show numbers to a bank. And that's another thing that really helps. And also, when you go to the bank, you're asking for an astronomically smaller amount of money as a loan than you would for a camp with property. And so the risk is less for them. Yes, there's not as much for them to take besides your house if you default, but the risk is so much lower for them. So it's everything. The numbers become smaller and everything becomes a little bit more realistic and easier.
How much of a challenge was it to educate the lender, the bank, on the camp industry? Because I find that over years, it can be quite a hurdle to climb. It's a real non-traditional business. It's seasonal. Yes, some of us have half a year and some of us have all year, depending on what we can do with our properties and our programs. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, were doors closed along the way because people say, we don't understand your business, we don't want to go into it? I think it's important for listeners to understand that, like anything, some doors will shut and some will open, but the deck you prepared to tell them what this business is about is a big deal. What was your experience in getting the bank manager, the chief risk manager, to understand what you're embarking on?
Yeah. So the short answer is use a bank that is experienced in the camp world. So before the other deal that fell through was a camp with land and was exploring all my options as far as lenders. And it was significantly more challenging to talk to a lender that had minimal experience. I'm not talking about no experience, the minimal experience with camp than at least on the East Coast, the known banks that work with camps, that know camps, that kind of get the cycle and can read a balance sheet for camp and look at a P&L and not think you're going out of business tomorrow kind of thing. So I think it does pay to use and work with a bank that knows the industry. And also when you buy a camp and when you're starting this, you're betting on yourself. That's what everybody told me as I was soliciting advice from almost anybody I could talk to. You're betting on yourself, right? And when you bet on yourself, you're using your experience. And if you use a bank that can recognize your experience, that you may have worked for camps that banked with them. So the bank that I used, I had their credit card in my wallet from other camps for 15 years. So it helps at least get your material in front of them and have them look at it in a realistic manner instead of who is this guy that wants a whole lot of money and they're sending me false numbers or just made up numbers. So yeah, definitely can't stress enough using a bank in that world. Because also when push comes to shove, they know what you're up against. And so if the bank's requesting documentation on July 20th, that you need to send them 100 pages of documentation every year on July 20th, that's a little unrealistic for a camp director in the heat of camp, right? So the banks that know camp, they ask you on September 10th instead of July 30th.
That's some good advice. I didn't really think about that. And that's amazing that you can leverage that time that you've been with another camp and have that information to speak on, because it is a lot of times the banks, it's just about assets. What can we take away if this defaults? And I know in our case, we did a bank for the property and we did a contract for deed from the previous owners and basically used the camp profits to pay them back over a number of years. But if we default with the camp owners, they could take camp back and we'd still be living here, which would be super awkward. But well, that didn't happen, thankfully.
That did not, yeah.
But it is interesting. The land piece, not having the land it does really factor into that equation. But the bank, that's great advice, I think, to think about, does this bank know other camps that are successful or have experience?
Sure. Yeah. And also it also helps when you're asking the bank for way less money. So the owners took back an owner's note, much like I've heard discussed on this podcast. I may have gotten a few financial lingos from listening to y'all. So thank you. And so they took back the majority. And really, I only asked the bank to help me with the down and some improvements. And because of a few technicalities and me not knowing a few things about purchasing a company or starting a company and purchasing assets, I actually used camp funds to do the down payment for the camp, because it was getting to be like May, June, and most of the coffers were already full at that point.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll pay out of the budget and then I'll replace the budget. And camp was so successful that year, I didn't actually need to replace that. So I was able to invest all of that money that I got from the bank back into camp and into the business. And it was like a stroke of luck. And I was like, part of me, 2020 hindsight, did I actually need to get that loan? But it's nice to have that. It was really nice to have that working capital and have some money in the bank to be able to work for me.
And that relationship with the bank, right, is so important over time, because you never know when you're going to have to lean on them for something in the future, which leads me to a couple of rapid fire questions for you. Number one, what influence did post-pandemic have on purchasing and things of that kind? That's one. Maybe we can just talk a little bit about that. Number two, since you didn't buy land, how willing or were there any hiccups with the facility you run your program out of with a new owner? They had clearly had a relationship with a family that was so entrenched in their identity and knowing this, and you come on the scene. I'm just curious about, for people listening who are not going to buy land, but you need the seller to vouch for the new owners. Can you talk a little bit about that? And third, maybe you can just jump into the communication piece, the timeline of the actual purchase of the Samuel family, let's say buying it from the Bieber family, and how that all works. So just three: COVID, the relationship with the lease holder, and lastly, just timelines and communication.
Yeah. So COVID, I think, made it all possible because camps not operating for a summer dramatically brought revenues down, and all those calculations on EBITDA change when
Yeah,
you don't have a whole season of revenue. Also, everybody was a little burnt out and really stressed and didn't know how things were going to go forward. So they were less, I think some people were less likely to hang on and stick through it. I knew of a couple of camps that sold during the COVID time just because either they weren't going to be able to make it financially through 2020, or they just saw the writing on the wall afterwards. So the lease portion, I think, was the most stressful part of the deal. I have to say, the Beaver family was incredible to work with, so supportive. They still are. They're still stopping by in my office to say hi and answering questions and all of it. I've heard some horror stories about like camps transitioning between the two owners, and it was really rough. And I don't know if this could have been any better. Just so I feel
that's
incredibly
awesome.
fortunate. So it's not just a private school where we rent. It's definitely a school with a philosophy. It's a Waldorf school. So they definitely didn't want some stranger to come in there and start a paintball camp or something like that, right? So culture and mission and having that drive the camp was very important for them. And they wanted to make, and they really liked having the nature place there, and it helped support them. And they were happy to have it continue, but they didn't want it to change, right? They didn't want me to put a go-kart track in or have go-karts or quads going around, which was all fine for me. Like I didn't want that either. So during the initial conversations with the Beavers, they talked to the landlord to see if they would even be able to transition the camp. And they said yes, for the right person, as long as they don't change things too much. And so once we formalized the letter of intent, I met the landlords, and that went really well. I think where it started getting bogged down is when the lawyers got involved, and not knowing what I don't know. And they also having a board attorney, and the lawyers started talking with each other. And then like things quickly started amping up and started getting really worried because at that point I was already fully committed to this in a few different ways. And so I remember I spoke to the executive director, the person, my landlord, and he's like, all right, the lawyers are messing this up. So we spoke behind the door there, and like, all right, we agree on this. We agree on this. I'll tell my lawyer, you tell my lawyer. And then a week later, the paperwork was done and we signed. And that took time and some stress, but all otherwise it was fairly straightforward. For them, they just wanted to know who I was and get a good feeling for me, because like I was going to be not just a business partner being a tenant, but also part of their community. And I
Yeah.
think that was the biggest portion. So they wanted to get to know me a little bit, and they wanted assurances that I was going to run the nature place in the same breath as the Beavers did.
Yeah, for sure. And were you in a position, did the previous owners have a long-term lease? Did you have to renegotiate a brand new lease, extensions of what existed? Just did that complicate things? You said you wrapped things up relatively quickly once you started talking to each other, but was there a whole new approach to the lease arrangement, your now tenure versus the previous owner's tenure?
Yeah, the previous owner's tenure was definitely a lot less formal. And because of the fact that there was going to be debt service involved here, like I needed a little bit more of a commitment time wise to make sure that I'd be able to
Yeah.
satisfy all of that. So I think that was a little bit different, but I think in the end they appreciated it. And they also liked having that kind of structure and foundation as far as what expectations go and where the camp is going to be held and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Mhm.
What about you mentioned wanting that initial loan from the bank to do some improvements? And I think that's a question sometimes individuals have if they don't own the land and they're leasing it. Talk to me about some of the improvements you wanted to make. Are you able to make them? Does the nature place own them, or can the school use them? Like, I think it's a common relationship between a school and camp, but tell people who are listening a little bit about how that relationships with worked with improvements on the land?
Yeah. So yes, we could definitely do improvements. I look at them as like non-permanent improvements. Or if we're doing a permanent improvement, it's more of a donation to the school in a way that we're going to be able to use. But part of my background is being a ropes course person. So that was the easiest way, at least for me personally, to make an impact on facility, both from a wow standpoint and just logistically being able to build it and get it up there and make those kind of improvements. But I also wanted to make sure we had capital for marketing improvements and logistical improvements. I think that was the biggest change that the Nature Place went through, is the logistics and the behind the office piece of how it operates, right? Where they're going from a lot of people having their hands in things and a lot of people making light work into like a very small core nucleus of people working. And we were going to need different pieces, more technology to make all of that stuff happen. So not just physical improvements, but as far as like what kind of physical or wow improvements from the like the family point of view, yeah, you can make capital investments in the structure of your place, but it's also program investment. So I wanted to bring new programs in because that is a very easy way of making a splash. And just also making it look more campy and more uniform. So if we're using a lot of pop-up tents for whatever, they were all different colors. Nope, they're all going to be green because green's our brand, right? You know,
Right.
Nature Place.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
that goes a long way to the feeling and the professionalism of a camp.
I would
Families
agree
always
that
what's new. Sorry, I was gonna say how families always want to know, especially when someone new takes over, what's gonna change, what's gonna be
Yeah.
new. So
and
Yeah. And
also
also, sorry, Howie, just to point out one thing, like from the other deal that I was putting together and everybody that I talked to, it's, oh, you got to come in and you have to make a statement. You have to do a big capital improvement statement. And so that went into figuring the financial piece for the loan. And when I got there, I learned that my family that is not one of their priorities, right? We are not a facility driven camp because we need trees, not facility. Like we
right.
literally run camp in a forest. And it's more about enhancing culture and outcomes. So, and those things, I guess, luckily for me, cost less than building a building.
For sure. And I think that speaks to a bigger topic. And in a moment, I still want you to talk about the timelines in just a second, to talk about when you started the discussions with the family and when the announcement was. But speaking about colors and things, I mean, the aesthetics are very important. A lot of us as camp operators have different viewpoints on the aesthetics. And it only takes a ACA day camp or resident camp tour to see how everybody, I've been on those, to see people's aesthetics on organizing their camps. But I also think that any brand new camp operator owner has to really get a sense of that splash mentality, because it's not so much what you add, they're also looking for what you take away, right? Those changes you make, well, we were used to doing this there, and now the new people aren't doing that. So it goes hand in hand, whether it's from on Thursdays, we had chicken burgers, but the new people changed chicken burgers to tuna salad on Thursdays. Mike, what's happening to this camp? I can't believe it. It's going downhill. So we all have, I know we all have stories like that, but uh, I'm sure in your own story, you probably have some considerations for even those things, Jason, but I just think all of those things are important. So if you could just talk a little bit about the timelines, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So I found out about Nature Place end of October, early November of 21, and had my first tour and had documents sent to me within a week or two. They were motivated and they knew that if there was a good transition that was going to happen, it had to happen quickly. And so parents could enroll in all of those kind of things because everything was on hold. It was like, hurry up and wait to see what's going to happen, right? The tenets of the deal were done by December. I think mid-December, I had all my documents ready to go to the bank for loan approval and all that type of stuff. And that happened relatively quickly, especially because I was using the same bank that I was working with the last time. So it was not so much a personal vetting, it was the actual deal. And like I said, the numbers were vastly lower than the previous attempt. So that sped things up. Also, the banks were in a little bit better position to lend in late 21 or early 22 than they were in 21 because of all of the money that went out during the government funds that were going to save everybody's business kind of thing. The banks were really leveraged, so they were a little bit more cautious. That money was coming back in, and funds were being replaced, and their balance sheets are a bit different there. So that also helped. I gave notice at the camps that I was running in like mid-January, beginning of January, and a month later I was sitting in the Nature Place office because we had a signed letter of intent, but we were still working on the lease, and the lease was needed in order to close on the loan. So the lease took, I don't know, I don't think the lease happened until April. I don't think we signed the lease until April. So I was like when I say I was betting on myself, it was a huge leap to leave the place where I was working, that income to start at a place, learn how to operate another camp, take deposits, take tuition for something that may have not even actually been able to run. So a big gamble there. Remarkably, I was able to sleep that spring. I think it was just so amazing that I was like in control of my own destiny. It felt calming. Lease came through in early spring, and then an insurance technicality kept us from closing on the loan. So like I said, we actually closed on the asset purchase before we closed on the loan about 6 or 7 weeks before camp started, and closed on the loan about a month later. And there I was sitting in the Nature Place camp office in 2022 going, oh, this is mine. Wow.
That's awesome. Well, it speaks to that. It's a fine timeline in camp. To be able to have it be as seamless as possible. It is this time of year, and then it's before registration, before hiring, if possible, right? I'm sure people make it work year round, but if you want to make that as seamless as possible for staff and for campers and families and yourself, it is this fall into winter time. And it sounds like you followed that. A few things trickled into summer, but that's awesome that you didn't have to stop holding camp for a summer. You could just, it could be seamless for families. And I think that's really an important thing.
The Day Camp Podcast is brought to you by CRS, Commercial Recreation Specialists, your go-to source for recreation solutions that will help ensure that your camp thrives this summer. Check out their inflatable aquapark courses for pools or lakes, the prime carts, the cool little go-kart things, the emergency alert and lightning detection systems. Whoa, the splash pads. Whoa, if you got the money for that, splash pads is the way to go with the heat we got. The Zoom Flume, a lot less money, and can't talk about the most awesome order of flipping slides that you could possibly get. The jumpers, okay, for bouncing all around the place. Mini golf, the prefab cabins and pavilions and bathrooms, the shade structures. Lord, do we need shade structures these days? The shade structures cannot be beat. And of course, the playgrounds, including the ones with the cool musical components. Anyway, CRS Commercial Recreation Specialists, your go-to source. Explore their website today at crs4rec.com because CRS is serious about fun.
Yeah, I think it's also really important to mention that while the previous owners were there during the summer to support, they weren't there on the ground, right? So there's a lot of camp deals where you're working on the purchase for a year and you come on as the assistant or associate director, so everybody gets to know you. And then during the fall, there's that transition, so it's seamless. I didn't have that runway, and that definitely caused a lot more headaches probably during the summer because the staff were like, who is this guy? I was talking to somebody else 6 months ago and like, who is this guy? And they didn't really understand the dynamics of why the sale transpired and the fact that I'm running it just like I'm continuing on the legacy here. I'm actually on your side. Things are going to be a little bit different because I pronounce words differently than that. Every leadership person is different. And that's going to have more of an impact on the staff, especially the long-term staff. I mean, we have staff at the Nature Place for 20 something years, and that's going to have a longer term effect on staff than it is on the campers or families. So something to think about is, in an ideal world, I would have been the associate director in 2021 before taking over in 2022.
Oh yeah, your timelines were so condensed. Did you find there was any registration resistance to the previous owners from a communication point of view in terms of rationale for selling and the trust they have, and they carefully chose you as the new owner. Like, maybe we could talk just a little bit about, I think people would be curious to know some of those methods of communication. Did you hold focus groups? Did you meet people? Did you invite them? Did the leaseholder give you space to hold an information session? Like, all these things. I mean, it's one thing to be in the world of virtual, let's meet the new owner, but there's nothing like that face to face. And because the area that you operate camp, right, there, it's a competitive space in terms of the market's quite competitive, I would imagine.
I'm going to say that the New York Metro day camp market's probably the most competitive camp market
Yeah.
on the planet. Yeah. So the communication piece is exactly what you said. Hey, we've carefully sought and found somebody that we trust and believe is going to carry on the legacy, and we trust them. You should too. Also remember, it was still during the height of the pandemic. So bringing people together in person was frowned upon. So we did some online sessions, and there was no enrollment resistance. There was a couple of people like, what's going on? But they didn't read the Beaver's email well. And after Ed or one of Ed's children got on the phone with them, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. So in my financial perspective, I put in a pretty big number of tuition returns. And luckily we didn't have any of that. It was actually remarkable. I will also say, given my experience, this is not the first camp that I've taken over from a leadership point of view after New Year's, and without the aid of having somebody grease the wheel, so to say. And so luckily I had the experience of what to do, what to say, and more importantly, what to expect. And really, first year is all about survival and then thriving. First you survive and then you thrive. So I was fully ready for the onslaught of what I thought was to come. And luckily for me, and also for everybody involved, that really didn't come. There was a couple of long-term staff members that were having some difficulty with the adjustment, but otherwise that portion of the transition was really great. I think just learning the particular pieces about the nature place and how unique it is, especially with culture and meaning, was more of a challenge than trying to make sure that our returning campers were going to be on board.
And I'd recommend that everybody check out Jason's website, the Nature Place Day Camp. It's just given the metropolitan area that you're in, I'm so impressed with the space you get to use as your canvas to deliver day camp. It's really great. And I encourage people to definitely check it out, knowing what the market's like and the uniqueness of that market with different style camps, and the commitment to nature, obviously, in the name, lives up to the name, for sure, from what I can tell, for sure. We're at this point where we like to pick your brain on kind of lessons learned. You've definitely had a wonderful journey of mentorship and being at the top of the org chart in a director role. Now you're wearing an ownership role. What are 2 or 3 things as we look to wrapping up this discussion? I know we could go on for quite a while, but what are your thoughts on this, Jason? Lessons learned, advice, etc.
Yeah, don't buy a camp in February or April. Try to give yourself a runway, unless you have experience doing it. And the second thing is, I've known how to operate camps financially from the running of them, but the actual purchasing of camp and starting a business, boy, that was a steep learning curve. And I was lucky enough. I had a lot of people giving me great advice, but it was like the small details, like putting down the wrong address on most of the tax documents before I knew where my office was going to be, led to a whole lot of headaches that I'm still trying to resolve with the IRS. Yeah, I think most of it revolves around taxes, to be honest, and that type of thing. Like, forgive me for being naive, but I had no idea that like equity payments to debt service were not tax deductible. So my accountant's like, you made this much money this year. It's like, no, I don't have, like, my cash flow doesn't say I had that much money. It's like, so that was a steep learning curve the first year. And now I'm starting to figure out like that whole portion of like being a business owner, like that I would say that is probably like owning the business has been the biggest learning curve, and also the least attractive portion of owning my own camp.
Hear ye, hear ye.
Much rather operate the camp than operate the business. And I would say the last piece is know who you're getting in bed with as far as like partners. Now, one of the reasons that I pursued the nature place versus the other opportunity was I was able to go into this on my own. And I think knowing what you're willing to, like, what your priorities are about your purchase and your ownership is really important. So for me, having majority stake in the camp or having it outright was one of my top priorities. And while I would have loved to have my own facility and own, my own land, because I'm very much a facility oriented person. Like I'd much rather go buy a Kubota than talk about anything else about the structure of running a camp, right? So like, but I was willing to give that portion of my wants up to make sure that I could go in on this on my own. So I think looking back on it is making sure you have a really good, clear list of your priorities and what your negotiables are and what your non-negotiables are when it comes to the deal that you're pursuing.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's very good advice. And I love my accountant. Like that is so important that you have a good accountant. I couldn't do it without them.
And a good accountant that knows camp as a business.
Hmm.
Just like a bank, and your accountant needs to know a little bit about how a camp operates, or else they're going to think you're a wacky business.
Hmm. Or willing to learn, right? Willing to like talk to you and have those conversations and planning. So,
Well, and that was my experience too. We had the benefit of having sort of family accountants, but as we went on our own, I really wanted to develop a relationship with our own accountant. And it was beneficial for us to, as smart as he is and was at the time that we met him, we went on this journey together. And there was something to be said for him getting this education as I was getting this enhanced education too. It doesn't work in our case, he's now been our accountant for 25 years. But at the time, we just really liked what we saw to be the relationship with someone who was going to help us with that. The relationship, like everything in our business, is everything. But then his expertise and his guidance to making good decisions really helps. So yeah, just having those good resources in your corner is so important because they sniff you out. My experience, I've said this on the show before. My partner, when we bought our overnight camp, my partner was 28 years old. I was 34. My wife and I were very young with small kids. I didn't know the first thing about all this stuff. And then all these older gentlemen at the time told you what to think and how to do things. And then in the meeting with that firm, the guy who's been my accountant for 25 years is the guy who sat on the side of the boardroom table who I like more than the big boss. And I wanted him because I think I could learn more and do this with him. So it all became this weird kind of thing because these people who quote know everything can sometimes make you think things you shouldn't be thinking or lead you down a path. So get a collection of good advisors, and this network in the industry can help you seek those people out too.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Especially talking about accountants, right? Like all of this I'm very much a do-it-yourself person. So I set up all my accounts and all my QuickBooks and stuff like that. And not knowing a thing about taxes, I needed an accountant that was willing to have patience and also teach me a little bit along the way instead of just like doing my books for me. And so I found a relationship like that. And it is like really helpful for me and like developed a lot of trust and knowledge for me. They keep on saying, it's like, yeah, you did really well for not knowing anything about this. Like your QuickBooks was almost set up correctly.
almost. That's all that matters.
Yeah,
Almost.
almost. Yeah.
QuickBooks is amazing. They should also sponsor our podcast for camp owners. All right. Well, Jason, again, like how we said, and this episode is every time we could talk for twice as long, but we are going to move on to our new rapid fire questions. Like Brene Brown's podcast, we just have a couple rapid fire questions for you to answer at the end of our podcast. So are you ready for 5 rapid fire questions, Jason?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, let's go. Number 1, what is your favorite camp meal?
Chicken nuggets.
Oh, that was easy. If you could leave any program area, what would it be?
Oh, sailing. Come on. Yeah.
Ah, I see the
Sailing.
sailboat behind
Yeah.
you. Yes, I saw that painting. S'mores, burnt or golden brown or something else?
I'm going to go burnt.
Burnt.
Burnt. Yeah.
Carcinogens, maybe they'll end up being good for us. Homesick camper or a peace out parents, a camper?
Wow. Going to go homesick camper. Definitely about the empathy of it all, right?
Yeah. All right, final question. As a camp pro, would you rather be on the phone in the office or in the action?
Oh, in the action. I can't stand being in the office. It's like the worst place to be during the summer.
Ditto.
Yes. Ditto. Ditto. Yeah, Kelly and I just watch each other's Instagram to see who can appear in goofier costumes every day when we're greeting the buses, so or the cars or whatever. So we're
Yep.
trying to stick to that, right? We're going to continue to do that. And then Jason's going to have a harness on. He's going to be at the top of his climbing facility.
Yeah, the offices are like 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Rest of the time you should be outside.
Gotcha. This has been great, Jason. I'm so glad. I know we connected at Tri-Stage many months ago, and thank you for being a fan of the program, but also we're so glad we got you on it because I think your insight and your journey will be really helpful. And I'm confident that there's going to be lots of nuggets and takeaways, as my friend Kelly likes to say, all the takeaways from all of our programs. So with that, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, Jason, if they want to connect with you and ask some questions about your journey or other things in general, how would one get a hold of Jason Samuel?
Yeah, email is the best way, jason@thenatureplace.com. And yeah, I guess I'm old school because I really love email still.
Yeah, totally. Kelly, how do they get a hold of you?
The best way is email as well, probably Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com. But I also have my Instagram and our camp Instagram on the show note.
And for me, Howie at camprobinhood.ca, because we're in the Great White North. So please, we don't have snow yet. So don't generalize or stereotype. But Howie at camprobinhood.ca and at Howie Grossinger on Instagram. We want to thank our sponsors, Camp Brain and Camptivities, of course. Please don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we mentioned in this episode and lots of good stuff here from our show and other Go Camp Pro podcasts out there, which are awesome, by the way. We hope you enjoyed this. Thank you, Jason. Kelly, it's great seeing you. And we look forward to everyone joining us once again on the Camp Owners Podcast.
The Day Camp Podcast is brought to you by Go Camp Pro and the Go Camp Pro Podcast Network. Find a podcast for camp professionals of every age and stage at gocamp.pro/podcast. Thanks for listening, friends. Hey, Camp Pros, we love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, we hope that whenever you share an idea that you learned from the Camp Hacker podcast, conference, summer camp professionals group, or wherever else, that you're quick to give credit where credit is due. That way, we can all encourage more camp pros to share the tips and tricks that will make camp better.